our resources. So those first two chapters I think are really important, and we challenge the public that if they want to kind of see what's going on across the entire organization, those two chapters. After that, there's actually tabs for each individual department, whether it's an operating department or it's an enterprise fund. And so that goes into fire, police, public works, recreation and parks, all of our operating funds, and then you get into our enterprise funds. And there's a method to our madness. I expect that for our two newest trustees, you're going to be on information overload. One of the reasons I tried to look at doing some semblance of orientation with you over the past couple of months is I knew what you were headed to see with budget review and our meeting schedule across May. I would guess even with Trustee Wood's perspective of serving on the library board, this budget document is going to be just public finance on steroids compared to what you were exposed to with the library. So what I've asked the staff to do is they're giving their presentations. The hope is to cover highlights of their respective departments with the intent of trying to avoid as much independent jargon in the fire service, the police service, community development. Myself and Mark will try to eliminate as much of the acronyms as we can, being mindful that some of this stuff is going to be really, really brand new. As we go through the presentations, don't hesitate to ask questions. When we start to look at the police department, fire department, etc., if there's something you have a specific question about, let us know. We welcome that. If there's something you want to talk about on the side or something you think about after the facts, we're accessible. Both Mark and I will make ourselves available for any of you, in particular our newer trustees who may say, you know, hey, I just have a question. What does, who's this Irma? What's her name? Who is she? Or things like that the rest of the board will think is kind of funny and will get it, but maybe you don't want to ask that question in front of everybody else, so we'll be available for that. Besides that, any questions before I turn it over to Mark? We'll talk about the financial summary and challenges and hit some of the highlights in those first two chapters before we get into our first departments. Any questions? Mark?
As Tom said, one of the purposes of this document is to be a communications tool. The document itself gets submitted to the Government Finance Officers Association. You'll hear that GFOA quite a bit. So the professional organization that does a lot of standard setting for government finance. The other board that does a lot of setting of rules that we have to follow is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. That's GASB. So you'll hear if I blurt out GASB, GFOA a lot. There's a little bit of background there, and there also is at the very back of the document there is glossary. Thank you very much. Wow. That has, yes, there are pages of terms that are in here that are it's the very last section of the document itself. So if you ever come across an acronym while you're looking at this and you're not sure what it means, go to the back of the document and it'll explain it. Apart from being a communication device, there's two other purposes that this document serves. It's a policy document. There are significant policies that get set when the board conducts strategic planning. Those policies are contained within this document. And that's how staff plans their budget, is based on those policies. The third item for this is that it's a financial plan. Obviously, I think that goes without saying, is that it's a financial plan. Something that I really want to stress to the new trustees is that a budget is the authority to spend money. It's not a mandate to spend money. Just because it's in the budget doesn't mean that we're going to spend it. We try to look into our crystal ball and think what's going to be happening in the coming 12 months. But try as we may, we're never 100% accurate in what's going to happen. So we try to estimate as best we can. We're very conservative with our revenues, and we're very realistic in what we think we're going to be spending. But you'll see us in one of the upcoming meetings, we'll be amending the current budget, because sometimes, as I said, things change and we have to make changes. So those three items are what's required when we submit to the Government Finance Officers Association for the budget award. It needs to be a communication document, a policy statement, as well as a financial plan. I want to start on page, look on page 1-7 and 1-8. The paragraph that starts at the very end of 1-7 says each section of the budget follows the same format. This is a very good explanation of how the document is put together in terms of, you'll see every section is in the same sequence. The way there's detail and summary, and you'll see that explanation there. I will go in just a minute. We'll look at the general funds, total expenditures and total revenues, and I'll explain what's on that, what's on those schedules. However, if you're ever looking at a summary schedule and you're kind of, wait a minute, what does this column of numbers mean? Come back to page 1-7 and 1-8, and it'll explain it to you what those numbers mean. So going forward into the financial summary, behind the financial summary tab, on page 2-2, at the bottom there, it talks about the financial projection for the 19-20 budget. There's 5 areas that are explained on the trend that are expressed throughout this document. There are 5 major points that are the framework of creating the budget. And you see there's those 5 items there: identifying and assessing core versus non-core services, controlling major expenditure categories, revenue protection and enhancement, maintaining a leadership role in the region, village infrastructure maintenance, and continuation and resolution of new initiatives. There's, in the front section, in the overview, in the Roman numeral lettered pages, there's about 18 pages of that. I'm not going to get into that. And it says there, and just above those 5 items, it says, if you start on Roman numeral page 3 in the overview, you can read for 15 pages about these 5 items. And it goes into much further depth and detail on how these 5 pieces frame the construction of the budget. The remaining pieces of the financial summary are briefly talked about there on the bottom of page 2-2. Financial summary chapter of the budget contains revenue assumptions, graphic presentations of revenues and expenditures for all those funds, fund summary information, capital expenditures, and the budget impacts of those expenditures, and a summary of significant accounting policies. I'm not going to get into that because it's very technical issues right there. Also, these are requirements by the Government Finance Officers Association. When we submit this for the budget award, there's like a checklist. Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you meet this requirement? Did you meet that requirement? A lot of the information contained in this financial summary section are what the Government Finance Officers Association wants to see within this document. So like I said, I'm not going to go over it this evening. If anyone ever has questions, just to reiterate what Tom said, if you ever have any questions about what's in this document, please let me know. I will spend as much time as you want going over with you and explain what's contained in this document with you. So, moving forward, I want to go to page, well actually the first one is, it's one that people ask quite a bit about. It's on page 2-7. It's the dollar bill. So if you look at it, it shows what the tax bill breakdown for a Park Forest resident living in School District 163 on what they have on the property tax bill and how it gets allocated. So you see for the 3 school districts, 163 Prairie State and 227, 55% of their tax bill, and this was what the tax bill for last calendar year, because we don't have, Cook County hasn't processed everything as of yet to get us the information. So this is for last year. What you see, 55% goes to the school districts, 37.5% comes to the village, 2% goes to Cook County, 5% is the library, and then for Rich Township and some of the other very small items on the tax bill, it's 0.5%. So I just wanted to point this out because there are questions. A lot of people ask, where's the dollar bill at? Where's that explanation at? So it's there on page 2-7.
Is it possible to get the other school district, like 162 instead of 163? Because like my parents live in Lincolnwood and their property tax bill is different from this one because they're not in 163.
Yes, we can. We do 163 because the majority of the village is in 163. While we can give you a breakdown saying, based on the same indication, or like these same factors, rather than it being 163 and 227 is a 202, or is it 162, 227, or however the breakdown might be. I do have information. Mary Gankowski, my predecessor, was collecting property tax bills from various people she picked out to collect information on. So, we can provide that information out to the board, just so you have that in your back pocket. So if anybody says,
I just need some ammunition.
Certainly.
It'd be nice going forward to have that breakdown for every district.
We can. I mean, one thing we want to be mindful of, we see the size of the stock already. So we certainly can do that. One of the things we always want to be mindful of, and it's something we actually could, like if we get it redundant in our presentations, the Government Finance Officers Association might say, you know what, they might take a point or two off. No, it's because being part of the communications document is like want to be as concise as possible. But by all means, we could do that. We could create a presentation that tries to get all of that information in there. My thought would be is that the actual graphic, the picture of the dollar bill, it's not going to change really that much. It's the information that is put underneath it that is really going to change. So yeah, we certainly can do that. Then I want to go to pages 215 and 216. These are the two summary schedules I was talking about before, and if you want to look at a snapshot of our general operating fund, which is our largest fund, and this gives 3 years of information to you. On page 215 are the revenues, and page 216 are the expenditures. On the very bottom of each of those pages, you see motor fuel tax and foreign fire insurance are presented there. The reason why those are presented here is with the way the operating revenues come in, it's a continuation of similar type revenues as well as expenditures. So that's why that presentation is made here with these. But when we're talking specifically just the general fund, you'll see there's totals just above where it has motor fuel tax on each of these schedules. So I just want to point that out, that there's two other funds that get included in these two presentations. But when you talk specifically just the general fund, you want to look at the amount of those totals on those lines just above where it says motor fuel tax. So the breakdown of the columns, where it says 17-18 actual, 18-19 budget, 18-19 estimates, 19-20 proposed. It's the same on these two schedules. It's the same on every summary schedule in this book. It will have those same 4 column titles. Fiscal year 17-18 actual, that means where did these categories finish at June 30th, 2018? The village's fiscal year runs July 1 through 2018. So the most recent completed year is fiscal year 17-18. So that shows where all of these revenue categories on page 215 finished for the year. And then when you look on page 216, where all of these, the various departments in the general fund, where they finished at June 30th, 2018. The 2 middle columns are presentations on the current year. It's the budget for the year, so that's the plan that we expected things to happen at. And then as we go through the budget process, the various departments and various staff make estimates on where they think things are going to end up at June 30th, 2019. So So that's the fiscal year 18-19 estimate column. So you'll definitely see differences in most columns. The only things that I'll say that will come in right on the dollar is when you look at transfers from other funds, and even those aren't exactly on the dollar. Those typically come in right on the dollar. Anything else on the revenue side will not come in right on budget. There's always going to be a variance because, like I said, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen and where everything's going to be at June 30. When you look on the general fund expenditure side on page 216, the only things that will come in right at budget are those transfers, because we plan for that transfer going out to these various funds, and that's what we're going to transfer to them. So those 99% of the time will come in right at budget, because that's all we're transferring to these funds. So again, like I said, this presents an overall snapshot, and I apologize, and then the fiscal year 1920 proposed are what we expect for July 1 of 2019 through June 30 of 2020. And then that very last column shows the change from the 18-19 budget to the 19-20 proposed budget. So that's what that percent change column means. Are there any questions on those two schedules before I move forward?
One thing we need to consider. You'll hear reference about the state considering cuts to the local government distributive fund, and I think it might be worth Mark just pointing out on this page what items actually fall under what's called the LGDF, and then you'd have a better idea if the state was talking about cutting 10% or 20%, you know where that's at.
It's on page 215. It's the state income tax line. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows down. So, since there's nothing definitive yet, that budget amount for next year, the $2,213,987, that does not take into account any reductions by the state. In fiscal year 17-18, the state reduced the distribution by 10%. In the current year, they reduced it by 5%. When we did the budget for the current year, you see that number, $2,097,541. That also did not take into effect or into account the 5% reduction, because as the state is very much want to do, they do it right at the last minute. So, and the state budget is on the same time frame as ours. It goes July 1 to June 30. So the last 2 years, they dropped these in. It was typically like mid to late June when they decided on making those cuts. So the amount for 1920, the $2,213,000, it does not reflect any changes. I believe the governor's proposal this year wanted to continue the 5% reduction, but there are significant bills down in Springfield that want to put it back to the full amount, as well as if there are any income tax increases, that we go back to the original 10% application. Right now we're at about it's a very odd decimal number. It's like 7.34. It's a odd number, because as the states changed our income tax rate over the handful of times over the last several years, they changed the allocation amount. They're saying we're still getting the same amount that we would have, but it's I mean, the math works out, but I hate to be cynical, but you'll find out I don't really trust the state all that much when with these state shared revenues. Anyway.
So what's happened previously, when there were changes in the state income tax from 3.75% to 4.95%, and there was kind of this flux back and forth with those dollars, when those changes were made, the state was keeping the increase on those things. And so what Mark is saying, when there's this talk of the fair tax or the graduated income tax and whatever that might generate an additional revenue for the state, we have no confidence that any of that is going to flow through to local municipalities. You know, I think it's House Bill 158 that Anthony DeLuca is supporting in Springfield, that would actually bring our portion back up to the constitutionally mandated 10%. That's a tough pill for us to swallow when the Constitution says that's what we should be getting and we're not. Just a little bit of a history for the newer trustees. there are states in the country that can, where municipalities can impose their own income tax. The state of Indiana is an example of that. They can actually impose a local or a county income tax. We can't do that in Illinois per the Constitution. But the Constitution was put together in 1969 said that in exchange for not having that ability, the states would then get a pro rata share, 10% of the income tax going forward. However, that 10% has been siphoned off, you know, slowly but surely since then, and so that's where you get to this number of 7.34%, whatever the number is that Mark says. Just want to try to connect as many of those dots for you as possible. If you hear that the state is looking at a 10%, know that it's 10% of 2.2 million. And right away, that's $2.25 million that we'll have to figure out to do something with. Sorry.
Actually, $220,000 that we possibly be losing. Not the full $2.25 million.
Oh,
but
I meant to say $250,000. I apologize.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So just to wrap up on these two schedules, I just want to point out what we're looking at in terms of changes from the 18-19 budget to the 19-20 budget. On page 215, general fund revenues are looking at increasing about 2%, from 25.1 million to 25.7 million. Expenditures are proposed to decrease 4%, from 27.9 million to 26, basically $26.9 million. So about a $1 million reduction in budgeted expenditures, coupled with about just shy of $600,000 increase in revenues. One of the things I do want to point out is with sales taxes, I don't know if anyone is familiar with, there was a very large, they call it a landmark federal Supreme Court ruling about sales taxes on internet purchases. If any of you make purchases on the internet now, you're seeing now, especially over the last 6 months, you might be on retailers that didn't collect sales tax from you before, you're now paying sales tax on that. That is a number that we're going to see that on page 215, that sales and use tax row, which is third from the top. You see that budget is increasing 14%. That's directly due to this internet sales tax. So it's something that's collected by the state and it's allocated based on our population, which is when we start talking about the census at a different point in time. That's why it's very important, because there are several revenues that we have in the village that we get based on our population. The higher our population, the more money we get. The lower our population, the less money we get. So, again, any questions on pages 215 and 216? The last item I want to cover in the financial summary is on page 2-33. It talks about the general fund balance. For the new trustees, what fund balance is basically that's our money in the bank. That's savings that we have. The board adopts fiscal policies every year. Within those fiscal policies, it says that we'll try to maintain between a 3 and 4 month reserve in our fund balance. To make it very simple, let's say if we spent $12 a year, what that means then is we try to keep a 3 to 4 month reserve. That means we try to keep $3 or $4 in the bank at all times, just to cover if the state does something, which throughout my career I've seen them probably 4 or 5 times take monies away from local governments. And that's done pretty quickly, and typically in the middle of a year or right before a year starts. As well as it allows us, if one of the pieces of information that you'll see throughout the years talks about the grants that the village takes advantage of. And we've done a fantastic job over the years of securing grant funding. And so having money in the bank, because typically with these grants, there's a portion that we have to pay. And if we haven't planned for it, we've got money in the bank to be able to take advantage of a grant that comes our way. And a lot of times with those grants, and I think Tom can attest to this, it's a very quick turnaround, because we'll be notified and say, we've got 30 days to be able to turn this around. We've got 60 days to turn this around. Can you take advantage of these monies? And the village has done an excellent job in being able to take advantage of I don't want to say free money, but money that's not, that's coming from another source from, that other than the residents of the village. So what the statement there on page 233 shows, it shows what our unreserved, our unassigned fund balance is, what we expect it to be at June 30th, 2019, which is about $9.2 million, and then what we expect it to be at June 30th of 2020, which is just over $8 million. I know it looks like, it looks pretty shocking to see that it's going to go down almost $1.2 million. I will say this, that expenditure number in that last column of just over $26 million, the village historically does not spend that much money. They do not spend our full budget amount. If you were to look at the prior year's budget document at the same page, that $9.2 million number that we expect to finish up this year, we had it in last year's document at about $8.4 million. So we're actually finishing $800,000 better than what we had planned for this year. I would expect that to follow suit next year. I can't say it'll be $800,000, but I expect that number will be better than just slightly over $8 million. But whenever we talk about the reserves of the general fund and our fund balance, this page right here gives a very good breakdown of how we get to that number. With that, I am done with the financial summary. Are there any questions that we went over? And I know that, like I said, there's a lot more information that's in here. A lot of it gets very detailed, gets into very fine minutia type items. But that's kind of, you know, to use one of Tom's terms, this is about the 5,000 foot, maybe 10,000 foot level summary on this. So, any questions?
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
The downtown CAM,
Yes.
what is the CAM refer to?
Common area maintenance. So sidewalks, curbs, picking up trash. That's CAM. That's the acronym that we use. And I think it's a pretty common industry standard, CAM.
Before we just go into other departments, I thought something else I think is interesting. Mark talked about the general fund, but if you look at the revenue expenses, we didn't cover all funds, did we?
No.
I think this is something that you ought to understand from a village perspective. If you look at the expenses, the revenues on 224 at $55 million, and the expenses on 225 at $56 million. 54 million if you take the library out of it. That's a combined $99 million of operations coming and going. And so when you think about the business community, talk about an organization that oversees $100 million in transactions. So I think that's something you need to understand that you're vested with. You have oversight of that, and that's why you want to have professional staff. That's why you want to have a professional finance director who understands what's going on with $100 million. I mean, I think we're probably just a few dollars short of saying that you're a $100 million operation that you oversee. And that comes with being a very complex municipal organization. We don't have a separate fire department. We don't have a separate park district. We have a housing authority. We have a lot of things that make us unique as a municipality. But don't lose sight of the fact that some of the communities that you come into contact with through mayors and managers may be communities of 2,500, 3,000, 4,000. Park Forest is a community of 22,000 residents that is full service. And if you hadn't looked at those two pages and added those two numbers together, that's something that you ought to just kind of think about that tonight, that you're tasked with overseeing basically a $100 million operation.
So, moving on, gonna move over to the fire department. We're gonna cover their section. There's a white tab that says fire. That's where we're gonna be going to. Turn it over to the chief.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We're going to start with our document. Like all departments, the fire department works to align our goals with those set by the board during the strategic planning sessions. Examples of those programs and achievements are documented in front of our budget document itself from pages 5.1 through 5.10. Starting on page 5, -10, we start to get into our performance measures, descriptions of each of our performance measure, and how we did as far as our benchmarking goes this past year. And as you look through those, you go further down in pages 5-12 to 513, they're listed out in table format for quick reference. With that being said, generically speaking, our traditional goal has always been to stabilize and protect property. But it's important that we have an understanding of some of the issues that we're facing as a fire department. Two of our biggest challenges that prevent us from achieving all our goals are manpower issues and unfunded mandates, in particular the requirements for continuing education. When we look at each of these, while they're separate issues, they definitely have an effect on each other. When you look at our manpower, we take a look at our 20-year history. In 1998, our minimum full-time staffing was 5 members, supported by approximately 30 paid-on-call members. That year, we ran 2,183 calls. 10 years later, in 2008, our full-time staffing was still 5, supported by approximately 22 paid-on-call members. In that year, we ran 3,265 calls. Last year, 2018, our minimum staffing was still 5, and we were supported by approximately 8 paid-on-call members. And last year, we ran 4,204 calls. So in a 20-year period, we basically doubled in our call volume. Well, the call volume itself isn't really the issue. It's not like our guys are overworked. The biggest issue comes into play with concurrent calls. We've been working on a host of different options to try to overcome that, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. The other thing that you don't see in our incident statistics is our request for non-emergency services. It used to be who you're going to call it was the Ghostbusters. Now you're going to call it the fire department. Whether it's a citizen whose battery is dead on their electric wheelchair and they need to be pushed to back to their home, or as the mayor found out the other day, a citizen finds a bird with a broken wing and they need it removed out of the road so it doesn't get ran over. More and more, we get called for a lot of non-emergency services, which we absolutely want to take care of, but it's all part of the issue. Our second challenge is the requirement of the continuing education our members are required to complete to keep and maintain their certifications, and also the additional tasks to our job description that the fire service has taken on. As an example, to be an advanced firefighter technician, which all our full-time members are, requires 100 hours of continuing education in a 4-year period. Also, fire apparatus engineer, fire service vehicle operator also require 100 hours every 4 years. Paramedic requires 100 hours of continuing education every 4 years. Over the last 20 years, we now have every full-time member as hazardous material operations level. Technical rescue, OSHA requires that our public works department has a designated rescue team and that they're trained at appropriate level. With that being said, we are that team. All our members are trained in vertical rescue, confined space rescue, and trench rescue. Each of them also require 100 years in a 4-year period to maintain certification. All our full-time members are also certified at surface water rescue and ice water rescue, our fire investigators, fire inspectors, and public education. Again, the Office of the State Fire Marshal, the Illinois Department of Public Health have put mandates that force us to keep our certification levels, and it's getting harder and harder to maintain all their certifications. Last year, our average full-time member completed 363 hours of in-house training. In contrast, our average paid-on-call member averaged 28 hours. I only point that out because, as you can see, these mandates are getting harder and harder for paid-on-call volunteer members to complete. So it's a nationwide trend. It's not specific to Park Forest. It's across the entire nation. With that being said, I'd like you, if you would turn to page 522. On page 522 and 523, in our budget, you'll see that accounts for our personnel services, insurance, employee support, which includes training, subscriptions, dues, and associations that we belong to, FICA, our IRMF for our administrative assistant pension, and then the fire pension. And then included in that, in professional services, is our contributions to Southcom for our dispatch. That alone accounts for 90% of our budget. And that's where the majority of our issues are with manning and training. One of the things that I do want to talk about on them two particular topics, our members have really been very progressive, looking for alternative ways to staff, man, and provide our services. This past year, with the help of our finance director and our village manager, we started a paid-on-premise program. What that did was allow our paid-on-call members to do sleepovers to help our manpower in the evening. More importantly, we call it the POP program, also provided a way for us to be able to start an internship program to be able to provide members of our community an opportunity to work and become certified firefighters while getting a little bit of money along the way. It's a little slow going, but we're going to keep pushing, and we hope to see success as the programs grow. As we move on and go into pages 5-24 and 5-25, that's the part of our budget that includes our operating supplies. That includes our uniforms, clothing allowance, one set of PPE for any new hire, audio visual aid, paint hardware, EMS oxygen exam gloves, trauma gloves, and then of course the next section is our maintenance. That's our contractual maintenance. That's the contracts we have with our radio vendor, our weather sirens, our reprogramming and radio replacement, AEDs, and what have you. That accounts for approximately 2% of our budget.
Chief, can I ask you, you said an AED, you want to explain to them what that is?
Oh, I'm sorry, an automated external defibrillator is what AED stands for. So the fire department is the host of the entire program for the entire village. So there's AEDs here at Village Hall, at the police station, the police carrying some of their squads now. There's one at the Aqua Center and the library and the health club. Our members do the monthly inspections. We take care of the batteries and the pads replacements as part of our program. The next section we go to is our capital outlays. I'm going to let the deputy chief discuss those.
Good evening, everybody. In section 526, page 526, you see the first item is protective clothing. Our bunker gear that everybody wears for structural firefighting has a lifespan of about 10 years before it starts breaking down. One set of bunker gear costs approximately $4,000. So with this program, we try to replace our bunker gear 4 sets every year to ease the burden instead of purchasing it all at once. We're on a program to try to purchase 4 sets a year to ease that burden. So it's very important that the gear is up to date, up to code. We're finding out that 70% of the firefighters develop cancer across the country. This is preventable through the gear, through keeping the gear newer. So we're finding that out but eventually we'd like to have 2 sets of gear. So when we go to a fire, we come back and wash the 1 set and put on a fresh set of gear, so keep the contaminants off of everybody. But that's one program that is very important to us, keeping us preventing cancer. The next line item, you'll see fire station maintenance. Our building is approximately 14 years old, so every year we try to pick one room to renovate. This last year we did our training room. It's one of the most heavily used rooms in the fire station. Renovated that. That includes lights, fixtures. We put a lot of LED lights in. Put in some new cabinets in. This next year we plan on doing our workout room, increasing the ventilation system, and increasing the weight systems inside the room also. And with that, fire station furnishings also go with fire station maintenance. A lot of our old file cabinets are from our old station. A lot of the old desks we're replacing and fixing things as needed. The next item, you'll see firefighting equipment. There's a lot of new technology out there that we're utilizing. All our equipment now is battery operated. Makes our job a lot easier, but we're having to maintain a lot of our batteries now. We're trying to make sure that all the equipment is interoperable, so we can use the same batteries across each apparatus. But to maintain these batteries and to maintain equipment in these harsh conditions, we have to constantly upgrade and replace equipment as needed. The next item, you see some special teams equipment. All of our members, most of our members are on special teams. Includes a combined area response team, which is a confined space, trench collapse, vertical rescue team. We have a water rescue team. We do have a diver on our water rescue team. And then we also have a hazmat team and fire investigation team. So everybody with other departments team up for an incident. But with that, we need the new equipment, new technology with that. So that's where that line item comes into play. Our EMS equipment, a lot of the new technology is increasing. With EMS equipment, a lot of our life pack monitors that we use, we can communicate with the hospital now. So even before we get to the hospital, we can send them the information to our monitors to detect a heart attack. And it's really improving the lives of patients. So the technology with that is really improving. EMS equipment also includes the AEDs, like the chief talked about, the automatic external defibrillators. A lot of these items have expiration dates on them, a lot of the pads, so we're constantly having to upgrade pads and the equipment within the EMS department. And then with our computer system upgrades, we rely on our IT department to advise us on computers and what we're needed. A lot of our office computers are constantly being upgraded, as well as our mobile data terminals and our apparatus. Each one of our apparatus has a data terminal in it that we can log our time in incident and every call. So a lot of this equipment is being upgraded. Also, our EMS reporting is all paperless now. So we do our EMS reporting on tablets, and these tablets are used pretty heavily, so they have to constantly be upgraded. But we rely on our IT department for that. And then down the page, you'll see the miscellaneous expenditures, radio batteries, our Knox box program, and our Opticom repairs. Further down, telephone, Verizon, cellular, and our wireless interconnection charges are also part of our utilities there. That pretty much encompasses our capital outlays. Any questions on anything?
Also on page 5-26, you'll see the leases and rentals section for $344,709. That's our vehicle service fund. That's set by our finance department. It's a fund that establishes and charges each department the cost of maintenance, fuel, and vehicle replacement plan. This year, the fire department will be replacing a pickup truck that was destroyed in an accident 2 years ago. This pickup is extremely important to us because it will be able to pull all our trailers. As big as our engines are, and I'm sure you've all seen them, they're not big enough to carry everything for all the special teams, so this vehicle will give us that ability. That's the 500-foot view of the fire department. If there's any specific questions, we can
answer. Just so for the newer trustees, that would be under the vehicle services tab, 24-5. Fire department's number.
And just, since we're actually at that section, what that is all the departments in the village that carry vehicles, that have vehicles, they're charged out of their department, and it goes into this separate fund. And it starts building basically a bank account for them, because you'll see, whenever the fire department goes to buy, whether it's an ambulance or a pumper, you're gonna get sticker shock from how much these pieces of apparatus cost. So, what this fund allows us to do is to maintain a separate cash reserve specifically for vehicles and funds, as the chief said, maintenance on their vehicle fleets every year, the fuel for those vehicles. And this is one of the methods that you can do to account for it. I would consider it's a preferred method because it doesn't put high dollar items in an operating budget like they just do within the fire department. It tracks it separately. But you'll see though that vehicle interfund rental charge. That's where all of those charges are going into is this vehicle service fund. So, just as a brief explanation of what that is.
And I think the vehicle service fund is probably one of the real good examples of sound fiscal planning. So when you go and buy a fire engine, $700,000, ambulance, $250,000. We had to come up with $700,000, without actually saving it. I think we're on a 21-year rotation where we buy a new engine every 7 years. If we weren't putting those dollars aside, and this will be a conversation to have with your colleagues at the IML or mayors and managers, if you had to come up with $750,000, that's not a small expense. We talk about capital items that may be $5,000, $6,000, $8,000. We can figure that out. $750,000 is a major expense, and so to be able to put money aside every year into a savings account, if you will, it's kind of like putting money aside of your house and being able to go buy your car with cash instead of having to pay 2.9 or 7.9 or whatever the going interest rate is. I think from Mark's perspective, my perspective, whenever you can buy those things with cash, you're much better off in the long run.
The things I do want to point out on page 523 of the fire department, the chief talked about the Southtown contribution that amount just under $84,000. That amount went down pretty significantly this year due to, I believe it was a reallocation of cost and revenues based with the Southcom board. Did a reallocation on that time. The Southcom costs are one of the things that we look at every year, and because it is a pretty substantial amount. Again, we are fortunate enough that it's gone down for the coming year. The other item that I want to talk about is just above that. It's the fire pension contribution amount at $1,360,000. Over the last approximately 8 or 9 years, the contributions to our public safety funds has gone up quite dramatically. For our new trustees, the reason for that is there's studies that are done every year by actuaries to say this is how much money the village should be contributing into these pension funds. There's something that's called the mortality table. It's basically how long do they expect people to live, and that's one of the calculation that goes into how much is going to be contributed to these public safety pension funds. Up until about 8 years ago, they were using a mortality table that was about 35 to 40 years old. As we all know, people are living longer. So when they updated these mortality tables, there was a significant jump in what was required to be contributed, as well as some other state mandates that came down the pipe over the last 15 years about how well funded these pension funds should be and by what date they need to be funded. So kind of a perfect storm over the last 10 to 15 years of variables that went into how much we have to contribute to these pension funds. And there, you'll see there is another section in the budget that gives a multi-year chart that shows how much is gone into the fire pension fund and the police pension fund. And it's not because salaries are just, you know, we're giving raises out left and right. It's because, like I said, between 10 and 15 years ago, these changes in laws and these updates in what the actuaries were doing had a profound impact on what I don't know what the village has to do with that. So I just wanted to point that out.
I just wanted to make a comment. With all the training that you have to go through, you're doing an excellent job with the staffing, because 100 hours every 4 years, that's 25 hours CEUs per year. And that's just for certain things. You've got the ACLS that you need for paramedics and everything else, correct? It's amazing. That's a lot of training.
Nothing else with
I have
fire?
a question. If you were looking at where to make a cut somewhere within the budget, 2% or less cut, or a freeze of spending, would you look at, maybe you go inter-fund rentals and using that, you're only going to be spending $45,000. And looking at last year, you're having a 3% increase this year, and to make that difference is only 172 from last year. So if we were to take that 172 from the 298, you'd still have 120,000 that would still go into vehicle income rentals for the year.
That's kind of misleading. The vehicle service, each piece of apparatus has a service life. As the manager was saying, there's an example, our fire engines. It runs 7 years as frontline engine, another 7 years as second out, and then the last up to 21 years is our reserve engine. So depending on the replacement schedule of where we're at in that particular year, that number will fluctuate up and down accordingly. But again, as the finance director said, you're paying for it ahead of time, so you don't have to come up with a lump sum when it's all due. Our last fire engine was $700 and some thousand. Our last ambulance was rated at $240,000, I believe. So I don't know if that answers your question.
And one of the things, Mayor, with that is that within finance, we've got spreadsheets that go out 20 years, vehicle service. That fire will actually, when they make a large purchase, whether it's a pumper, and sometimes the way years overlap, a pumper and an ambulance will be close together. It may not be the same year, but it'll be within a couple of years of each other. Their cash balance will actually get into a negative. There's other monies in the fund that help them out, you know, so the fund itself doesn't go negative. But fire is, I guess, the largest cash user of that fund because of the size of those purchases. The village has kept on a very, I think, very strict routine replacement schedule of these pieces of apparatus, because once they do start to go, as I'm sure the chief would say, the just trying to keep them going, it's kind of maybe a little bit different than a public works truck where they can, you know, slap some duct tape on it, hit it with a sledgehammer to pound out a dent. A fire truck is, and I say that facetiously, fire truck is much different. You know, that it's there to save lives. It's different. It's different equipment altogether, much more expensive equipment altogether. So I think that area, you know, if we're looking at anything, that's something that I don't want to say that it can't be touched, but there's a lot of planning that goes into that vehicle rental number for every department.
I think you also run the risk that if that's something we start to look at, that's how I think entities end up getting themselves in trouble long term. Because then they say, well, we can siphon that down, siphon it down, and 5 years down the road, you're looking at, you know, $250,000 to $750,000 purchase, and you don't have the balance, and then we have to levy for that, or you really start to get yourself into a problem. may seem attractive in the short term, but I think in the long term, you would find yourself into some of the issues that the state sees themselves. Where they try to take money out of this fund to provide that service, and then they're basically kicking their decision-making down the road a little bit.
Right, and that's why I would want to decrease it completely, just almost try to go off of last year's budget numbers. So if you did that, you'd almost be putting just under 200,000 still within the vehicle interfund rentals. The cost of the vehicle is $45,000, you're putting $344,709 into the fund. You take the 45 out, so 298. And then you go off of last year's numbers, and then 172,000, 117 would be the difference.
I guess can you say that again, Mayor? I guess I'm
So
not
you
following the numbers.
look at last year, so 516, you go off of the proposed into the budget. And so if you go just off of that difference is $170, what, 117, 117? So look at that difference. So if we try to say, how much could we decrease just to make that difference up? So then you go back to the vehicle inter-service fund, and you look at how much, where you could take a difference at within that. Like 45,000 off that 344 at 526, you have 298 left. So you'd still be putting $100,000 and some dollars into the vehicle fund.
Okay, and I follow where your math is coming from. I guess from a standpoint of it, though, Mayor, from the perspective of that, then changes the method that is being used to fund that. And again, as a one-time adjustment for, to reduce that by, let's say, $45,000 in a budget that is overall about $25 to $26 million. I hate to get off track with this method for the vehicles, which is, again, with the system that we have in place that's been used, I think, for probably 25 to 30 years. With that, I would be concerned about getting, like I said, getting off track with that because of the size of their apparatus and the cost of their apparatus with that. When we look at the affordability, and basically this is all formula based on, if we look at the depreciation, if we were charging depreciation, that's the methodology that we use. It's basically the depreciation of the vehicle that creates this interfund number, this vehicle interfund number. So that would then start changing the method that we use. That I really couldn't support doing that because I don't understand why we would, what the basis of that is, because we would then be shortchanging ourselves down the road when we would need to make a purchase on a piece of their apparatus.
And are you, John, just so I understand from your perspective, is it the 20% that you see in that line item is what kind of catches your eye?
The 3% increase in the overall increase in the budget.
Okay.
So where to not have an increase in budget, so not to have a 3% change. So if we looked at what that would take, we'd take $170, we'd take $170,000 and $117 to make up the difference. To not have an increase, a 3% increase in operating budget for the next year. So if you look at that, and where could you make that? If you dropped that and looked at the vehicle interfund rental so that there'd be no operating things taken care of or capital outlays, and that you looked at minusing that off of already the 45,000 on page 526 now, minus the 45,000 off the 344, you have 299,000. Then you take off the 172, and you'd still be putting in 120,000 into the vehicle interfund rentals. And that's where you're still putting money into and purchasing the vehicle. And so I just don't see the 20-year plan that you're talking about. Maybe that's where I'm missing out.
Yeah, and again, like I said, this is something that, it's been a systemic plan that rolls every year with that. one of the things I would also point out to you, Mayor, when you look at that 3% increase, you say there's $172,000 of that, that changed from 1819 to 1920. About $120,000 of that comes from personnel, when you look up top under salaries and overtime. So of that 172, about 120 of that is from there. So trying to make a cut somewhere else to make up for what the contractual increases, which is the majority of this. My concern is that it puts us, it kind of shoots us in the foot in other areas within our budget on that. Because the only other areas that you look at, I mean, our insurance increase, that's based on the renewals that we get. I mean, our employee support is staying flat. Professional services are coming down. Operating supplies went up about $3,500. The capital outlays actually came down about $25,000. So did the leases and rentals charge go up? It certainly did. But based on, again, this is the same system that the village has been employing on this, to get this on a one-time down to zero, what this does is then it creates, and you can kind of look at it almost like a compound interest situation. If you shortchange it once, that shortchange this year gets compounded next year. 2 years it gets compounded even higher. 3 years out it gets compounded even more.
So maybe if you could share that 20-year projected with us, maybe that would help.
Okay, sure.
Any other questions in the fire department? I think there was a reference on the cost for Southcom, and I just want to be clear about that. The amount that's noted in the fire department's budget is actually just a portion of what the overall Southcom cost is. And so when we move into the police department, we talk about the police budget. The chief can reference that while there's 15% of the overall Southcom cost is allocated to the fire department based on call volume, the other 85% goes into the police department's budget, and our true cost for Southcom is about $558,000. If you haven't been to the Southcom dispatching agency, it's worth your time. Somebody wanted to have a tour of that, I could set that up. It's state-of-the-art dispatching services, which I think really aid fire and police in their jobs and responding to public emergencies. If there's no other questions on the fire department, I'm going to allow the chief and the deputy chief to head home, and then we'll transition into the police department's budget. Okay? Chief?
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. So the police department has one of the largest budgets out of the department, and that is due to both the complexity and the scope of what our mission and services are, as well as the 24-hour nature of what we do. If you wake up at any time in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, there's a minimum of 3 police officers and a supervisor out there actively patrolling, and at least 1 records clerk in the police department for support services. And that's if it's after 2 a.m. If it's before 2 a.m. you're getting up to go to the bathroom. In addition to having a senior doctor, there's an extra person out there working. So it's a minimum of 4 patrol officers and a supervisor. So it's
Did nobody else catch that?
Yeah.
I surely did. I thought it was pretty good.
I tried. So, you know, if you ask my 4-year-old what I do for a living, she would say that Daddy goes to work and catches bad guys. And while it's not true that I personally do that anymore, the truth of the matter is the public's understanding of what a police department does isn't too much more sophisticated. They think that we catch bad guys. The reality is there's a lot more that goes into what we do. And even that is more complex. So for example, before catching bad guys, our main goal is to prevent the crime from ever occurring. And the scope of that is quite large. For example, we have the PAC program, the Police Athletic Activity Center. It's going to be in its 22nd year. This year we'll be providing a summer camp for kids in the evening. Well, what's the purpose of that? Multiple purposes, including building relationships with youth, but one of it is to have children have a structured activity in the summertime when they're most likely to get in trouble. So that falls under that crime prevention. So sometimes things you wouldn't think about fall under our mission. In addition to crime prevention, we want to do crime interruption. If a crime's happening, we need to respond and interrupt that crime. And if a crime is committed, we of course want to solve it. So it's the prevention, the interrupting, and the solving of the crime that falls under our mission. But really, that's the tip of the iceberg. Because when we make an arrest, the amount of work that goes into that, into making that arrest, is nothing compared to the backside, doing the paperwork, the processing of the person, and all the managing of the records that go on for, in some cases, for the lifetime of the case. For example, if we have a homicide, those records have to be kept for essentially forever. Personnel records have to be kept up until I think 7 years after the death of the employee. All that paperwork is managed by a human being in some fashion. There isn't a single piece of paper that's not touched by somebody. So when you think of police services, you think of the cop making the arrest or the detective solving the case. We're doing that. That is what's called field operations. So whenever we refer to field operations, we're talking about what the public thinks of as a police officer or a detective. But behind all that is support services, and support services exist to allow the police officers to do their job. It exists to manage the paperwork, to manage the police station, to manage the payroll, everything that goes in the background that really is more labor intensive than simply driving around, pushing the squad car, and making the arrest. So we divide the police department up into two sections. Field operations, and that's headed by Deputy Chief Winfrey, and then support services is headed by Deputy Chief Brian Reisky. Support services is not at all sexy, but really it's the backbone of what we do, because if there wasn't people doing that hours a day, we would have to take police officers away from that job of catching the bad guys and fulfilling those roles. So it's a major operation that we're trying to run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, which explains why we have one of the largest budgets. The vast majority of our budget is paying salaries and employee support, like the pensions and things of that nature. Really a small portion is any kind of discretionary spending. The narrative basically describes what we do, and then breaks it down further into field operations and support services. But the things that I want to hit on are, we have a section here that talks about community needs. One of my passions has evolved into youth services. I see a real need in our community for youth. We have a high level of poverty, a high level of single parent families, and subsequently we have a high level of juvenile crime. And I really think that we have the best opportunity to make an impact on our community by addressing youth needs. And one of the most exciting things we're doing right now is this partnership with the Urban Youth Trauma Center out of the University of Illinois, Chicago, where if a juvenile is arrested, we try to keep them out of the criminal justice system. We issue them a municipal citation, and their hearings heard in a local municipal hearing. They're not put in the criminal justice system. They don't get a criminal record. And if found liable, in the municipal system, you don't say found guilty, it's found liable. If found liable, they're sentenced to 16 hours in our youth violence prevention engagement. That's 4 hours a Saturday for four Saturdays, where an employee from the Urban Youth Trauma Center provides mentoring and structured curriculum on trauma-informed violence prevention. In the past, these juveniles would go to a similar program, but they do community service type work, picking up trash, things of that nature. We've evolved it into this where we're trying to provide them with a service. We're trying to make sure that we're giving them something to break that cycle of violence and maybe heal some of that trauma in their lives. That's just one of the things that we're doing. The police, again, athletic activity center, we've been doing that for 22 years now. We're doing that again. There's a long list of things that we do for juveniles, but that's going to continue to be one of our focuses, certainly as long as I'm here, because I feel passionately that we can make a difference by meeting the needs of our youth. The other thing is really taking a problem-oriented policing approach. We really want our officers to focus on not just putting a Band-Aid on the call for service, what's causing this problem, what's the root cause, and how can we address that. We also give every neighborhood a problem-oriented policing officer, so it links a specific person in a uniform to that neighborhood. If they have a long-term issue, if they've got that junk auto they keep seeing, they're tired of seeing it, or that neighbor who has that ongoing problem that's disturbing their peace, they can contact that problem-oriented policing officer and have a direct contact with the police department. There's nothing more frustrating than you call for a police officer, it's a different cop every time. They may not be familiar with your issue, you have to explain it all over again. The problem-oriented policing officer is a liaison who cuts that back and forth out, knows your neighborhood, knows your issue, can help you get a solution to your problem. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds on the performance measures. They don't change. What we report on performance measures does not change from year to year. A couple things I just want to point out quickly. On page 4-15, you'll see police calls for services in the box in the middle. That number, I would caution you against making a year-to-year comparison in the past because we've had different computer systems that have recorded our calls for service differently. And just one example. In the past, traffic stops counted in calls for service, and they haven't since we went to this new program called Spillman. So if you looked at 2010 and saw 16,000 calls for service, and 2018, 17,000 calls for service, what you might not realize is that 2010 number includes traffic stops. For 2018, if you wanted the true number for comparison, you have to add in almost 4,000 traffic stops. So it's a benchmark, it's a ballpark, but you can't make a year comparison until we've had one computer system for a long length of time. The other thing I would point out is on 4-18 on the bottom, for the first time, we are reporting traffic crash data. I feel that while there's a lot of factors in traffic crashes we necessarily can't control, for example, the weather or car performance, what we can control is traffic enforcement and how that impacts the psychology of the driver and park force. So our goal, if you look at 2018, we had 403 total collisions. We want to get that down to below 350, and we want to have 0 fatalities and under 75 injury collisions. Again, we can't necessarily control traffic crashes, but we can do our part, which is increase traffic enforcement. As an example, in April, Distracted Driving Month, we wrote 162 citations for distracted driving. That's just an incredible number. If you look at the last year in April, I think we wrote a total of under 10 citations for that same offense. So by having a directed focus on that, we're hoping to have an impact on traffic crashes. And then the other thing I want to bring out is our commitment to transparency. If you look at 419 in the middle, we report on citizen complaints. You don't see many police departments who willingly put out in the public information on the number of citizen complaints and how they handle them. We're not ashamed to do that. We think it's part of transparency, so we report how many citizen complaints we have every year and how we resolve those complaints. Just part of our community relations and our transparency. And then at 421, you're going to see training, just like the fire department. We have an incredible amount of mandated training by state law. It's not funded. And just as an example, last year we had over 2,300 hours of training through outside training groups. That means for 2,300 hours, an officer left our facility to go get trained somewhere else on a variety of topics. That doesn't count the 5 in-house training days we have, or the requirement for every officer to do online training every single month throughout the year to meet some of those mandates. So it's an incredible amount of training that we can do. Highly committed to training, just like the fire department is. As far as the numbers go, I'm not going to get too deep into the budget numbers. The deputy chief's going to hit some of that, but I do want to talk about capital outlays on page 436. You'll see $102,500 in capital outlays. When you see computer systems and upgrades, $62,500, I want to break that down for you just a little bit. Of that, we need new in-car computers. Our in-car squad car computers are about 10 years old now, and so $38,000 accounts for part of that $62,500, as well as just general computer upgrades. You know, one of the biggest changes that I've seen in law enforcement since I've started, I don't think I'm that old, I don't feel like I'm that old certainly, but the technology changes is just incredible. So for example, when I started, there were no tasers. We got tasers about 2000, I want to say 2004, 2005. We haven't had a new model since then. So part of the capital outlays is for newer models of tasers. Radios were simple. They worked off repeaters, they sat on your shoulders, small little things. Now we have very complex radios that are meant to communicate with multiple agencies across the state. And Motorola has stopped servicing those that were provided in a grant after 9/11. They are now over a decade old and inability to be repaired or replaced, so we have to have a new model. That's part of the amount in there. Again, in-car computers also have to be replaced. So just the amount of technology we're using, body-worn cameras. The board last budget approved body-worn cameras. When I started, we didn't even have in-car cameras. That came after I started. It was VHS cassette tapes. Now it's all transferred back to the station via Wi-Fi. But all this comes with an expense. That $45,000 we spent that you approved last year in body-worn cameras, we received a grant afterwards for $25,000, so we're gonna get about $25,000 of that money back. But still, a significant cost upfront to the village. So the biggest reason for our capital outlays is these technology needs and how everything keeps evolving and changing and increased costs with that as it does so. Very briefly, each of the deputy chiefs are going to talk about their respective divisions.
Right. What I want to do, as the chief indicated, I have the less attractive job here, support services, and I was promoted in 2018, and it was an eye-opener. Running a 24/7 operation, and that's what we're doing, is your personnel never stops, your vehicles never stop, and we're extremely busy. I'm going to give you a snapshot of really support services, because just so you have an idea, other than a police officer running out there and arresting an individual. So the support services, as the chief said, we're behind the scenes and give support to make the officers, give the officers everything that they need. I have two officers that work underneath me. One is a commander. He is in charge of all of our evidence. We get a ton of evidence submitted in annually. The last audit was close to about 8,000 items of evidence that we have at our police department. Everything is on site for all of our evidence. That is managed by a commander. He also manages our body cameras and also the in-squad car cameras. He also is in charge and oversees all of our local court that's held at the police department. Sergeant Moore, he runs our PAC program, which we're well known for, which the chief indicated and informed you about. He also participates in many school-related events. The bicycle program, which was implemented several years ago, we give bicycles away monthly to kids who are deserving of the bicycles. They're generally put into a raffle and we give away bicycles. He also manages crossing guards in town, does their payroll and scheduling and hiring. And then any other community relations events, he oversees that. Then we drop down to two administrative assistants. One is a full-time and one is a part-time, and between the two, they run the crime-free housing. And with the crime-free housing, we have 4,500 properties who have crime-free housing licenses. So it's a lot of renewals and the database, which is needed in order to run that crime-free housing, and also with all the alarm permits that are in the village. Then we drop down to our records, and that's really the nuts and bolts of my division. We have a records supervisor, which oversees 5 full-time records clerks, in addition to, we are now up to 4 part-time records clerks. We were running short there for a while, and with those 4 part-time records clerks, 3 are currently in training right now, and everything's going well with them. Every piece of paper, as the chief said, is touched by at least 1 records clerk. We have gone paperless. It's helped with our searchability. However, that means more scanning and more data entry. So it really is a time-consuming task. Each full records clerk, instead of their daily responsibilities of servicing our customers who come into the police department, want to file a complaint, need help for anything, the list goes on. Our full-timers are responsible for certain tasks in order to manage all this paperwork and responsibility that we have with all this data systems. To give you an idea of some of those responsibilities, the Freedom of Information Acts, we get a lot, and specifically in 2018, we had 571 FOIAs. 571 FOIAs, which is managed by one full-time records clerk. Now, mind you, that each records clerk has a backup, and that's traditionally a part-time. So we have 5 full-time records clerks with 4 part-time, so each of those 4 part-time records clerks will be an aid to a full-timer. So backups when they're on vacation, because we can't stop it, it has to continue. Subpoenas, we average 50 a month, that's 600 subpoenas a year. Parking tickets, on average 4,000 to 5,000 a year, parking tickets. Municipal tickets, 1,200 to 1,600 in the last couple of years is the average. And then our uniform crime reports, codes and expungements also need to be entered and submitted. 24-hour operation is our records clerks as well. If you look at how many police officers we have, we can cover the 24 hours, but as I told you, we have 9 records clerks that have to cover 24/7, 365. So their commitment is just as powerful and committed as a police officer. And without them, we wouldn't be able to function. And the reason why we need the records clerk there for the 24 hours is, first off, customer service. Chief Winfrey, he shared a story. He went into a police department on the north end, and he has to pick up a telephone and wait for an officer or someone to answer and not have that face-to-face. And it's always been open 24/7, and we feel that seeing a person in front of you walk into our police department 24/7 is very important to the community. We are able to house our own prisoners. In order to do that, we have to have eyes on the prisoners. The officers are in and out of the station, but our records clerks remain there, and we have our surveillance cameras on the prisoners, and mandated by the Illinois Department of Corrections, we must do prisoner checks every 30 minutes for an adult, every 15 minutes for a juvenile, and any adult that may be at risk, that lowers it to 15 minutes also. So every 15 minutes or 30 minutes, a record clerk literally has to get up, and we have to physically go look at them. We can't use just the screen and look at the screen, so we have to physically walk back and forth, and everything's documented. We also manage our own leads, the law enforcement agency data system. It's a nationally used system that tracks your warrants when stolen property, stolen cars, sex offenders, violent offenders, things of that nature. That's all leads. We have to have a body in that records room when if Richmond Park gets a warrant or Evanston gets someone on our warrant, they would then send the leads hit confirmation to our records clerk, who then physically pulls up the Park Forest original warrant and would verify that warrant, and then we can go ahead and send an officer to get that. So in order to run our own leads, we have to have someone there as well. Also, they assist in absence of a female officer. They also search prisoners, which many may not be aware of. Our records clerks search prisoners. We send them to training, and they do a fine job with that when needed. And most importantly, we have carried on a reputation with Markham Courthouse in Will County as being one of the best police departments with paperwork. Your paperwork has to be on point. It's very crucial when you take a prisoner to Markham Courthouse and you hand it to the intake officers. If you're missing one piece of paper, they will not hesitate at all to say, you're missing that piece of paper, see it, and send you away with that body, and that causes a whole bunch of problems. And then finally, with all the tickets that I mentioned, we also receive payments 24/7. You can come to the police department and pay those tickets. So that sort of just gives you, I wanted to give you a quick snapshot of the support services and how it operates. Do you have any questions for me?
Excuse me, I did have one question.
Yes.
I think Chief Medina can answer this question. You referenced the police-oriented liaisons?
Problem-oriented policing,
I'm
yes.
sorry.
Yeah.
Problem, okay. How many do we have of those in the Park Forest?
So essentially, every neighborhood is broken down into a problem-oriented policing zone. And so we have a total of 24 problem-oriented policing officers, although one of those, or two of those are not assigned to neighborhoods, they're liaisons. We have a homeless liaison, and Officer Greer is responsible basically for any homeless-related issues. Again, we feel it's a specific vulnerable population, not confined to any one geographic area, and also a veteran liaison. A lot of times we have veterans with issues, and that's Commander Schweitzer is the veteran liaison. So 22 different neighborhoods essentially, and then the homeless and the veteran liaison. And then briefly, Deputy Chief Winfrey can cover the field operations.
It might be worth, Joe, just for your own education, when you go to the village website, police department's page, you can actually drop down to a map for POP, and it will show you the assigned police officer for each section of the community who's got that POP section.
Yeah, that's at the website, VOPF.com/police/POP. And you can pull up that map and find out who your problem-oriented policing officer is.
It also has their contact information, their email, and we have residents utilizing that daily to get in touch with their POP officer.
Sounds like a great idea. Thank you.
I'll take just a minute or two. For the most part, everybody's familiar with the Field Operations Division. That's the detectives and the police officers that you see out and about. At full staffing, our patrol division has 28 individuals assigned. That's 4 shifts. Each shift has a watch commander, a sergeant, and then 5 patrol officers. At any given time, we're not at full staff, whether that's from retirements, people leaving, reassignments. One of the biggest issues that we have with that is that when we're not at full staff, it takes about a year to get an officer hired through the academy, through their field training program, to assign it on their own. While that officer is, even after they're back from the academy, while they're in their field training program, anywhere from 14 to 16 weeks, they're not considered staffing. If they're not able to be out there on their own, we can't consider them towards the staff. So that's the patrol division. Everybody's familiar with what they do. They're out and about. Our investigations division right now has 7 people assigned. We've got the investigations commander, the sergeant assigned, and 4 detectives.
Three traditional.
Three traditional detectives, and then we just reinstituted a proactive team. It's a community action team. Their mission is basically the same as we've had in years past. The staffing has allowed the special assignment team, the stand-up years ago. Basically, it's taking that problem-oriented policing mindset and applying it to a proactive team. So last year, some of the board members are aware, we had a real problem spot on one block on the west side of town. Had we had that community action team assigned or implemented at that time, that would be their focus. Hey, let's get to the root of what the problem is. It's easy for us to go and respond to the calls as they come in, whether they're fights or robberies or anything like that, but that's not addressing the root problem. To get in there and use outside the box thinking to get at those issues. So those 2 members of the community action team are also assigned to the investigations division. In addition to the patrol investigations division, we also are members of the South Suburban Crimes Task Force. After a year in our investigations division, every member goes through specialized training and is assigned to that Crimes Task Force. The Suburban Major Accident Reconstruction Team, which handles fatal and serious crashes throughout the South Suburbs. We have 2 people who are specially trained and assigned to that on a call-off basis. The South Suburban Emergency Response Team, which is the multi-jurisdictional SWAT team. Last I heard, we're up to about 36 municipalities. It's not cost-effective for a municipality our size to have its own SWAT team. So when we have high-risk search warrant entries or hostage barricade situations, we are able to call on the South Suburban Emergency Response Team, and they can respond with vast amounts of manpower and equipment. And they provide the training. We have 2 officers assigned to that. In addition, we have the Illinois Law Enforcement Alarm System, ILEAS, which is a mutual aid response statewide. For example, if there's large protests, to get manpower to handle those things. More commonly, what ILEAS handles is, they're called car plans. If we have a major incident, we use them for things like structure fires. But if we have a major incident, a shooting to where we have to block off an area for an extended period of time, we can get on the ILEAS radio and call for additional cars from surrounding agencies outside of Richland Park and Madison and Chicago Heights who would normally respond, where they can send additional officers over and assist us for an extended period of time without having to incur overtime costs and try and staff that out. The chief touched on the training, how dedicated we are to that. We're one of the few agencies that every one of our patrol officers and investigators is certified, goes through the training, is certified as a juvenile officer. Every officer every first line officer goes through crisis intervention team training and gets certified that way. The state recently mandated that you have to have 2 years experience before you can do that. We have officers who snuck in before that mandate, so we got them certified before that. We have all of our supervisors go through immediately upon promotion, go through a first line supervision course, and our command staff goes through either the FBI National Academy or Northwestern University's School of Staff and Command class through that way to be certified. So that, I don't want to take any more time, but I want to get you to outline that there's a lot more, even just to the field operations division than what you see the patrol officer driving down the street. The only other thing that I did want to bring up, the calls for service have been brought up. If you, it's back on page 4-15, the chief mentioned that, you know, our CAD and records management systems have changed, so some of those numbers have varied over the years. One thing, if you look, 2017 was kind of an anomaly, 16 and 17, where everything spiked up. Last year, the actual calls for service were down, but if you look at the next page at 416, you looked at our actual index crimes for UCR, which are the serious criminal things that are reported, including homicide, rape, robbery, aggravated battery, all the things listed there. Those numbers continue to go up. A call for service is opened when somebody calls the police and needs something, or a police officer self-initiates a response. When we gauge the seriousness of things, not every call for service results in a police report being written. A lot of times it's what we term a log entry. Something very minor, an animal complaint, for example, would be closed out just with comments in the computer log. So the more serious incidents always result in case report. We were up approximately 600 case reports last year. So while the call volume went down a little bit, the seriousness and the importance of the calls that our officers are responding to continues to go up. We were up about 600 from last year, and we were up about 200 from 2016 to 2017. So those numbers continue to go up. Just something to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, and just lastly, vehicle services is pretty simple for us. We get free new squad cars every year. Our cars run, 24 hours a day. So generally we make it around the 90,000 mile mark. We're beat up enough, and the cost for repair is going to exceed the value for us. That said, we generally give them to other departments within the Village of Park Forest. So they're not simply at that point in time gotten rid of. They usually go like the building department, water department, something of that nature. Somebody who's not going to beat them up as hard as 24-hour police will. And then this year we've also asked for a canine vehicle. We want to have 2 canines. We just got 1 implemented last year. The second we hope to get implemented this fiscal year. What that will allow us to do is have 1 canine working no matter which shift. Basically, there's 2 shifts, or 4 shifts total, 2 are paired. So every shift pairing will have 1 canine available to it, allow for better coverage. Canines are just an absolutely phenomenal, useful tool for us. So essentially, that's what vehicle services is. 3 replacement squad cars. It's pretty standard. And this year, the specialty fleet vehicle is a K-9 vehicle. And that wraps up, opens up for questions.
I have a question. The body cameras, were we able to purchase all the cameras that we needed, or was it still kind of staggering?
Well, no, we made an initial purchase of 25 cameras, and what we found was it still wasn't enough, just based on some of the specialty assignments we had and things like that. So with the grant funding, that paid for the majority of the 25 that we purchased. It didn't pay for the redacting software or some of the hardware that came with it. The cameras itself it paid for, and it paid for 4 additional ones. So with this 4 additional body-worn cameras, we're completely set, we believe, for quite a while with the body-worn cameras.
You went live at the end of January?
We went live with the body-worn cameras January of this year. And so far, it's been a pretty good success. We're seeing an improvement in prosecutions. We are working out some bugs with battery life, but other than that, it's been overall very good implementation.
Have we actually had dialogue with legal counsel that will contact us and find out if we have body-worn cameras, and once they find that that's the case, they really kind of cease their inquiry with us because it's that kind of evidence that if the department doesn't have it, then they may be able to say, okay, there's different elements to a case that you can't really prove, but some of you are very aware of some incidents that we've seen where the body-worn camera is just, it's like television.
Yeah, it's also helped with citizen complaints. We've had a couple which were completely baseless, and it would have been one person's word against the officers, but you'd introduce a body-worn camera and it's crystal clear what actually occurred, and that helps out tremendously as well.
Thank you.
I have a question. To what do we attribute the rise in the seriousness of the crimes? Or is that hard to?
Well, I mean, really it comes down to we see an increase in the violent crime, unfortunately. And it's difficult for us to impact that. We had a shooting Saturday night, and how do you prevent somebody from picking up a gun and using it in anger? It's a difficult thing to address. It's systemic along the Chicago area, and it's just indicative, I think, of what's trending right now. And I think that any solution to it's going to be it's going to take a holistic approach. It's not something just throwing more police officers, unfortunately, it can do.
Do we find that these statistics are commensurate with the other municipalities around our board?
Yes, it is. What we're seeing, for another example, we saw a tremendous increase in the stolen motor vehicle thefts this winter, and they were almost to 100% running vehicles left unattended. And we saw that across the region. I mean, everyone's getting hit with that. A lot of times we see a spike in crime in Park Forest. We are seeing it throughout the region, and it reinforces my belief that a lot of these crime trends are as much social trends as they are crime trends. I think you have people communicating, talking, saying this is what we're doing, getting away with it, and you see it increasing.
Thank you.
I think another corresponding detail, and I think over the years we've watched this, if you look at the chart on 418, there's details on batteries. And it used to be once upon a time that there were much higher numbers of assaults of batteries that actually to a fist fight or a match. But with the proliferation of guns, that just doesn't happen anymore. And so, when you look at the number of batteries that you have in Park Forest over, the course of a year, and you have 12 in a given year, 21. This is a community of 22,000 residents. And so, I know it was always a champion of this. It used to be that people just say, let's take it outside and we'll settle it. It doesn't happen anymore. Even in the case that happened 300 block, was it Sangamon? Sangamon, it used to be that maybe you'd have a domestic battery issue, but now this issue of just pointing out a gun and shooting somebody is, what the heck? But it's because, and it really goes to not only what's in the south suburbs, but you hear the superintendent in Chicago talking about it all the time. It's just the proliferation of guns is all over the place. Anything else, Chief?
Chief, has it made a difference since you guys made, I don't want to call it a law, but I guess it would be a law that you couldn't leave your car running if you get a ticket?
Yeah, so we've always had that ordinance. We stepped up enforcement of that. We stepped up communication. I mean, via social media, we were hitting that message nonstop. It was a directed focus. And a directed focus, what we do is we'll pick for the month, what's an issue we see trending? And we'll have all officers focus on that issue. So this vehicle running unattended was a direct focus for multiple months in the wintertime. And we wrote quite a few tickets for that, even more instances where we caught it and maybe the person was warned, we took the corrections and, and had them come in and get them. Unfortunately, just like the vehicle thefts we had last night, we had 5 to 6 on the T streets, unlocked motor vehicles broken into. It seems like no matter how much we try and get the public to stop doing that, it just keeps happening. It's such a simple thing. Hit that key fob, lock that door at night, and that solves 95% of our motor vehicle burglaries. Don't leave a running vehicle unattended, solves 99% of our motor vehicle thefts. Unfortunately, not everyone's getting the message or isn't heeding it. So it's not having the effect. That ordinance has existed for years, and even aggressive enforcement isn't having the effect we'd like to see.
I was just noticing that the investigative division had over 500 grams of heroin and 300 grams of cocaine. Are you seeing that heavy violence and it seem like the drug with that, or is it kind of separate?
We see, when we do search warrants for drugs, we almost always find guns. So that's not unusual. But the violence that we're seeing tends to be profit-motivated crime, so armed robberies, and then retaliatory crime, fused between groups, and that's retaliation back and forth. So we don't see the violence connected to the drug trade as much. Again, we do find guns with guns, and maybe some of the disputes are over that, but it's not like, in the 90s when you pictured someone defending their turf. We don't have that issue in Park Forest per se. It's more these social media-driven disputes on people getting offended over words and unfortunately resorting to violence. That's where most of our violence is coming from, that and then the armed robberies.
Do you think a gun buyback program would help, or do you think that those illegal weapons would not be turned in?
Yeah, I don't think the legal ones. I think gun buyback, it's, mom and pop who's got the gun that the uncle died and left them. And I'm not against them. I mean, any gun taken off the street is one that can't fall in the wrong hands. But I don't think it's the ultimate solution with that exercise.
One of the things is, like 2 months ago, you had traffic crashes. And there was a nice diagram the police department released.
Yeah.
And you were talking about lowering the total collisions. When you're looking at the hotspots, kind of figuring out how to lower those traffic incidents and collisions. I mean, especially when you looked at one of them was Western Avenue and Sauk Trail.
Correct.
I know I'm going to get under fire when I say the next thing I'm going to say, though, but if we're trying to lower the calls for police and fire, and we look at high areas where there are collision rates like Sauk Trail and Western Avenue, would it be in the best interest to put a red light camera there for safety purposes?
Yeah, so we actually looked under that under Chief Green. He did a lot of research on that, brought out a couple companies, and what we discovered was when they tested, set up cameras to test how many violations we have, and when they're also looking at traffic crash data, we didn't have enough collisions to meet their threshold to institute the camera. So unless that data changes significantly, we didn't have any locations that qualified, even though we have what we consider high incident locations. Another one is Western Avenue and Stega Road. That's one of our highest collision intersections, and unfortunately, it wouldn't even qualify for that at that point in time. So again, we're stressing officers watching those areas. Other things, we have a brand new speed trailer that we got for a grant for Cook County, about $15,000 speed trailer. You might have seen it on Western and on Sauk Trail, and right now it's on Blackhawk. We're hoping that helps out as well as this increased traffic enforcement. But unless our data is significantly changed, we wouldn't qualify for red light traffic cameras.
And then do we have any crime mapping and analysis tools that shows where we're seeing some of these crimes happening?
Yeah, so that heat map that you saw, it was a free trial that we used.
Okay.
It cost about $1,000 a year. And we're holding off on that kind of expense because right now, all of the municipalities who use Southcom and Econ are working on having that heat map created by the South Suburban Mayors and Managers. Has basically an offshoot that does that mapping or can do it, and we're in the beta run of it right now. So within the next few months, we'll know that's going to work, and our hope is we can save the money and have that. In the meantime, I don't have anything but 2018 data, but we can provide that data on burglaries, things like that.
I just thought I was talking with someone from Glenwood, a trustee from Glenwood. He was mentioned how they're doing that this year.
Yeah, so that's what he's referring to, when was in that.
Okay.
It's right now, they're in the beta testing.
Well, that's through the GIS consortium?
Yes.
All right, and then Officer Evelyn, have you heard how she's doing?
Yeah, essentially, they think she was dehydrated and hopefully get some fluids in her and help her get. She passed out today at the physical fitness test, so. Doing okay though.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
So any questions from the police department? Gentlemen, good evening, and we'll move on to community development. Larry, thank you for sticking it out with us. Jerry and Jerry.
Thank you. I would ask you that a bit of the summary you'll find in the manager section of community development, sections 117 and 118. A little bit of an overview, but I would ask you to jump to community development, which is section 9.1, and where that starts. And the first thing I'd like to talk about, which is really on sections 9.2 and 3, which the manager talked about, and even Mark in the review, is grants. One of the things the department does is kind of keep a running number of grants, and to give you that understanding, really, through the years, for the last 9 years or so, the village has seen about $37.4 million worth of grants, and it's significant when you understand that most towns are, they get excited when they get $50,000 grant. And every department has worked cooperatively toward getting grants, and you can see how that helps offset those costs of operating expenses that end up being the burden on our residents who and their tax dollars. So we're looking to replace that, but I wanted you to see that. Last year, we had 17 grants that were just under $900,000. A lot of this money comes from the county and the state, but really the federal government, because they get the money from the counties and the states get it from the federal government. As you know, overall, in the last few years, the money isn't there anymore, or it's a lot harder to get. One of the things that helps the Village of Park Forest is a very good reputation of getting a grant and executing it. So many, the county and the state issue grants, and they're not spent, and that doesn't look good when they're reapplying for HUD for more money. Basically, it comes from HUD. The village does a very good job of using the money, and then when there's unexpended money, it's brought back from that's been issued, and we often get a call and ask if there's anything that it could be used for. And we do have running opportunities, and the manager had mentioned that and talked about that. One thing I'm sure he shares a lot when he's down to Washington, D.C., and we deal with all the HUD, the federal government agencies and that type of stuff. So I just wanted to, at least right now, show you that's where it's kind of housed, where you can see some of the examples in the money and who's and how it's used. Next thing I wanted to bring to your attention, and really, if you turn to page 9.7, I tend to get asked a lot about numbers, building permit issuance. You can see on the first line there, and I'm kind of going to flip you guys kind of all over. But then if you turn to page 9.8, we talk about overall inspections. Last year, 2018, 9,600 inspections compared to the year before, about 1,000. That's directly related to the opportunity that the board had given, that we were able to get an additional seasonal part-time inspector. And her impact is worked out well in grass cutting, which is her main responsibility, which she handles garbage cans and complaints, just about all the kind of complaints that you all trustees are going to get all the time. You pass them on to us and we follow up on them, and we'll follow through. I mean, so much that I was, this year, my 2% increase, I actually asked the manager if I could put that into additional, put it into her salary, because it's very valuable for that. Past years I've used that money for, which will look, if you look at grounds maintenance at $110,000, that's income, below is expenses. That money in the budget is increased about 50. I systematically use that money for that purpose, and that's paying for us doing property maintenance of vacant properties or enforcement type things. The village probably spends collectively, it's been averaged, probably something, could be around $250,000 a year as far as dealing with vacant foreclosed properties. We've been dealing with it for the last 10 years. We're in an upswing now that things are starting to improve. And when you look just below it, it talks about the number of vacant houses, number of foreclosed properties, foreclosures occupied. Those are averages for the year. But as far as number of vacant houses, that number which shows 526. In our March update, we do quarterly updates that currently is about 494. It houses and foreclosures is 473. Those are significant decreases from when we had hit the highs. I think the manager referenced that. And it figures, I don't have those numbers, but we were around 700 to 800 properties, and I've shared that in the past. The village is, we're seeing an upswing, things are improving, property values are an increase, home occupancy is on the increase, we've been monitoring that. Really, I've noticed that for about the last year and a half. More work is being done in building permit values. Investors and homeowners are fixing up houses and improving it. Investors are buying houses now and starting to sell them again as opposed to renting them. Rental occupancy has been on a decrease the last really 2.5 years. The numbers are showing that actually before the recession or economic Great Recession we had 2007, 2008. Occupancy, our change of occupancy inspections showed that owner occupancy was about 70%, rental was about 30%. That actually flip-flopped about 2015. And it's now, these last few years, it's about 50%, starting gradually going back again. As a matter of fact, this year, I've been sharing with the manager, it's close, but it's 51%, 49% owner occupancy. So owner occupancy is coming back, rental occupancy is going down, investors are fixing up properties to sell, property values are increasing. And we can see that in overall sales, and that's usually we share in February when we get those numbers. There's a lot of positive things that are happening in the village with regard to that. I wanted to also share that another responsibility that the village, our community development department has, deals with the cable commission. And October 2018 is the franchise agreement with Comcast expires. The village is looking to potentially, one way or the other, either renegotiate a franchise agreement with the cable company, with Comcast, as our attorneys are looking at it. I shared about a year ago, that we were not going to renegotiate that franchise agreement and go to the states and tell Comcast, because they've been falling under that as the AT&T. Not sure exactly where that's going, but one way or the other, the cable commission will be dealing with that transition for those responsibilities. The other thing I wanted to share that the department also is responsible for, it falls under the Housing Authority, housing programs, which is actually tab 20-1. And as we look to the numbers here on 20-2, Jerry Buchanan is the executive director, or handles the role of the executive director of the Housing Authority. And we look at the numbers in the middle of that page. Village has 177 of its own vouchers. Now, it is not a public housing authority. It doesn't own property. We manage vouchers. In addition to that, through January of 2019, there's 345 portable vouchers. I think we've talked about that kind of in the past, that most normal housing authorities should not have any more than 10% portables that they have in their voucher program. That would make the the housing authority should only have about 17 vouchers. But Jerry runs a very good housing authority. It's well respected. It enforces HUD requirements. It has good landlords. It has good tenants. The housing stock is maintained well. Word of mouth is, on portables, you can take your voucher and you can go anywhere in the country to, and a lot of people choose to come to Park Forest. Nothing wrong with that. We're happy with that. The only problem with it is, we shared in past years, it's a fiscal issue because we're a small housing authority. When you get that portable in, you don't get a full 100% of that money for reimbursements from HUD. So it's a little bit, it was a crisis that we were dealing with, the Board of Trustees was dealing with, and about 2 or 3 years ago, and the manager and the mayor are going to Washington, D.C. to deal with the anomaly that we have that HUD didn't know how to answer and deal with. One of the things that we have seen, because of the values of property going up and rental properties decreasing, the voucher program has started to decrease too. The portables have decreased. And we talked about March of 2019. The portable number is 333. Here you saw it in the budget at 345. That is systematically decreased since October of 2015, when it was at 503. And also portable, you can port in, you can port out. So people also leave. So I wanted to share that, and that we're seeing improvements in that area, which Mark could probably address better the fiscal issue of that than I can. Sure, and they've been wonderful in helping us out through that whole crisis that we've been dealing with, and Jerry has been dealing with it. Matter of fact, through that time, because of the volume was so high, that you, the board, allowed us to hire another caseworker. We had 2 caseworkers, 177, but we were dealing with over 600, close to 700 cases, so we were able to hire another caseworker. And but we're still high though. I mean, we still are doing 482 properties that are vouchers in the village right now. And so the Housing Authority is a separate government entity that was created by the Board of Trustees in 1988. We began to get vouchers in 1992. And the board has supported that, basically the personnel out of that in order to run that program. I know I threw a lot out real kind of fast, but if you have any questions, let me know, or over time, you can, happy to answer any.
Yes, forgive me for my own ignorance, but
No.
what does portable mean?
Okay.
What are portables?
Jerry, I'll let Jerry, I mean, I can answer it, but I'll let Jerry answer.
Basically, portable means it allows the voucher holder to transfer or port, we call portable, to other housing authorities. So you have people coming from porting or transferring to, from Chicago Housing Authority, Cook County, Springfield, wherever, for various other housing authorities. So basically transferring from one location or one housing authority to another housing authority. And HUD feels very strongly of allowing voucher holders to have that option to be able to move and transfer port in this case.
That wasn't always the case.
Right.
It wasn't always the case where you had portability. The idea was to say, okay, if once upon a time, I think we were originally endowed with 177.
50.
We were 50?
50 Section 8, when it was the old Section 8 program. And
But the way that would have been is if you got a voucher in Park Forest, you had to stay in Park Forest.
Gotcha.
You couldn't go anywhere else. So the advent of the portables allowed you to transfer to Rockford, Peoria, or wherever else there may be a housing authority, not just the Chicagoland area, you could actually take that
State.
across the country.
And
Across the country too.
I don't understand why they don't go to Hawaii, because that's where I would go with it.
And that was about 1990, when did they change from the Section 8 to the housing voucher?
It was about in the 90s.
In the 90s.
Certificates.
That's when we were up to, and HUD has awarded the housing authority the 177 vouchers. Those are the housing authority of Park Forest. Now, those folks too have that voucher, and they can pour it out to other localities as well. And there's been actually some absorbing and trade-offs and that kind of stuff, because you can absorb a portable. But portable just means I get a voucher, I can go anywhere I want. You have to be in good standing, you know, and the landlords are screened, and the tenants have an annual screening that is conducted for income eligibility and all that kind of stuff. But there's change on
We're looking at the applications for the housing authority, and then like the housing inspector, the housing caseworkers. Is there a requirement for the minimum village, or is that just kind of money to supplement the additional requirements? For the community development department?
Yeah, the employees.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's a HUD program, it's a
Correct.
federal government
So
program.
we can't put stipulation on whether they live in Park Forest or not?
No, those, yeah, those are.
For the workers?
Yeah,
Okay.
no.
All right. Long-term, do you think there's any benefits to having them move to work in an upward mobility program for our residents that are on the housing vouchers? And creating a self-sufficiency program?
It's a separate program.
It is a separate program. The Family Self-Sufficiency Program basically allows the family to, or I should say the head of the household, set goals. And the goals, their set goals, and as their wages or income increases, I should say wages, because it's only tied to wages. As their wages increases over time, money is set aside in what we call like an escrow account. So that program would, we would definitely have to get HUD approval, because you're allocating money set aside in an escrow or like a bank account, and as a person complete their goals, they would graduate and receive those funds. So I'll just give an example. A person starts a program, they're not working, so the housing authority is paying all the rent. They become employed, and now say they're paying $200 for their rent, and the housing authority is paying the difference. In this case, I'll say the rent is $1,000, so we're paying $800. But some money that's the difference that they're now paying to the landlord is put aside in that account. So it would involve getting HUD approval, because we're talking about additional money being set aside. And again, like I was saying, once they complete their goals, and they have to have a caseworker working with them, providing resources, doing the counseling, and once they complete those goals, then they would get the money out of those, out of that family self-sufficiency bank account. So.
And I've heard that HUD is actually giving grant money for the starting of move to work programs like UC and Champaign County. So they're actually providing more funding on top of if you're providing move to work to get your residents off of the housing voucher and into a house within your community.
Okay, you said, right. Well, I will say this, about half of our current voucher holders are employed, whether it's part-time or full-time, they are employed people. So, yeah.
How do you see us working with Cook County's housing authority, and how many vouchers do you see compared to Will County to Cook County are there?
Turn to page, let's look. We have a number there. If you look at that same page on 22, underneath the chart, the numbers there, it shows the data from January of 2019, that 171 of the portables come from Cook County, and 85 of those 375 portables that come from Chicago Housing Authority. So 75% of the portables that are coming to Park Forest are coming from Cook County and Chicago Housing Authorities in Park Forest.
Looking at long-term, if we were to look at the housing authority, how do you see us working with the housing authority for Chicago Housing Authority and Cook County Housing Authority with us sunsetting the housing authority for Park Forest?
And it wouldn't be with Chicago, it would be with Cook County.
Okay.
And we very much could. Matter of fact, HUD's solution to us was just dissolve your housing authority and let Cook County take it
That's what I was
over.
also told.
Now, I could give you a little bit of history going back to the mid-'80s when the Village of Park Forest had no control over that, the Cook County Housing Authority. At that time, there was probably about 90 vouchers in town, that our most problem property land were those properties and those landlords. And we actually, the Village of Park Forest sued Cook County because they were not enforcing HUD regulations. We are having problems not only with housing, property maintenance, but with police issues. And that's when the board, in its wisdom at that time, chose to control its own destiny by creating that housing authority of Park Forest in 1988, so that we would be able to manage our program.
Correct, and now with the ordinances we have in place, do you think those are just as sufficient if we were to start working with Cook County's housing authority and to put a sunset on Park Forest housing?
So we'd lose control of the program that we have right now and how well it's maintained. The one thing that we have, the caveat that works really well with Park Forest, with it being within the Village of Park Forest, is it's Park Forest inspectors, our housing inspectors do the annual inspections. The big thing is, well, first of all, we don't, if Cook County had the program, so you know, it's confidential where all the subsidy properties are in town. It's, I mean, the Housing Authority Board of Directors don't even know where those addresses are. So it's totally administered. We would not know where they were if it was run by Cook County. So when there's an issue, we wouldn't even know that it's a subsidy program. That's how in the 80s and the 90s, every rental property that was a problem was viewed to be a Section 8 problem at the time. But since we manage it and we know where they are, if there's an issue or a violation, we share with the housing authority, because it's in my office, we immediately cut off the money. The biggest thing that landlords want is the money, and we cut it off immediately. That was the problem with Cook County. It was taking 6-9 months. We were having issues and it wasn't managed. Cook County is in worse shape today managing their program than they've ever been. If we lose that control, I think we could definitely document where we'll see a deterioration of those houses, and we'll be reverting back to a loss what we've gained over the last 30 years to get where we are today with the program. There is not a desire by Cook County. How many vouchers does Cook County have?
Cook County have 12,000
Yeah.
vouchers.
They wouldn't care about these 150 or these 300 or these properties at all.
What are we doing for the residents who have been on our voucher for the long term?
Well, there's no time frame that a person can have that voucher holder or voucher, but as we see, as time goes on, as the income increases, their portion of their rent to the landlord increases and the housing authority payment decreases. And then we have had some people basically opt out. They get to the point where their income is sufficient where they're able to pay the entire rent. So we have seen people income continually increase where they're no longer on the voucher program.
Right, and there's a number of cases where they've actually ended up buying the property.
And that's what the move to work also helps with, and that works with local investors and the land bank authority.
Right. But that would be applying for a different funding program with HUD.
So ultimately, I look at it as, what are we doing to ultimately help those residents who are on it? Right now, we're just having a program just to say we have it. Why don't we try to ultimately provide self-sufficiency and the services to get them, especially HUD is providing the grant money for it.
Well, we're a small housing authority.
And there's funding for the small housing authorities, and that's what Champaign County.
And Champaign County is not a small housing authority.
It's under 100,000.
Under 100,000. Yeah,
Right.
it's under 100,000. The Village of Park Forest is 22,000.
Right.
Their voucher program is, we can give you the numbers on that. Their voucher program is larger than that. We can do
No,
that.
I'm saying
No,
move to work is meant for small housing authorities.
We can do that, but probably we would be coming back to the board of trustees and say that we need more housing caseworkers. because it's gonna be
More
more.
with that, and I was told that would be funded through the program. So I would just like to see the
Well, they're
program.
always-
I'd just like to see the program move
Well,
forward
I
and
don't
present it
disagree
to
with
the
you,
board.
John, and that'd be great. The housing caseworker load is supposed to be how many housing caseworkers load is?
Well, for us, because we.
Well, not for us, but what it's supposed to be.
Actually, it's gonna depend on the.
Well, it's like around 200.
Yeah, and we,
Okay.
right now, if we, we have close to 5, and we have 3
Right.
caseworkers.
Right.
But also, I would like to just add, our caseworkers are not only managing their current caseload, they do have an alpha split. The other thing, they're doing other responsibilities too. One caseworker is dealing with inspection of HQS, housing quality standard inspection. Another one is handling the port ins, those people that do port or transfer here. Another caseworker is working with, directly with the portables, making sure we're collecting the money for the rents that we pay out, and also receiving the administrative fees from the other housing authorities.
And if we were to put a sunset on the program, all of those services would now be provided by the Cook County Housing Authority and the Will County Housing Authority, correct?
You said if you were to put
If
what?
we were to sunset Park Forest Housing Authority, those services would still be provided by Cook County Housing Authority and the Will County Housing Authority.
Sure.
But we wouldn't have control.
Correct.
Is there an ordinance that we could put in place to have the control? To work with the Crawford Housing Ordinance that we already have in place?
I don't know how, it's a HUD program, we either part of a HUD program or not part of a HUD program. I'm not sure, to be honest, we have to look at that, probably have to talk to the attorneys though. The Housing Authority is a separate government agency. In a sense, the Village of Park Forest does not have the authority over that government agency anymore, it runs itself. Now, what if the village decided to do was no longer help subsidize and fund it? Because if you look that the village provides 70,000 to help support it, and it's using Village of Park Forest employees, that would be the way you would do it, is you just vote not to support.
Yeah,
The
the
program.
village didn't underwrite with support and then provide the facility that we have.
Right.
It would go belly up. It would
Right,
be
and then Cook
really
County would just take it over.
And actually, the net cost of the village is $30,000, because there's a $40,000 charge that we take out of the housing authority to pay for, like, finance, department staff time. So it's a net $30,000 cost, so, just for clarification, on that.
Well, we can investigate, and Jerry can look
Yeah,
about
okay.
application to
The
pursue,
look to way work. I can
or
look to
we
that.
can, and then report that back to the board.
Actually, Chicago Housing Authority does have Move to Work, and they're like 34,000 vouchers. Not every one is, I'm just letting you know that, yeah, the program does exist, and I can look into it.
And to say that it supports, HUD provides an admin fee for each voucher holder of ours, 177. On an annual, there's a cost there. But how much, that's roughly, how much is it per month? Like 80?
Yeah, it's like $80-something in
Yeah.
regards to the portal, or just for
Right.
HUD.
Well, just their vouchers.
Right.
You know, there's a,
Yeah, we get a administrative fee from HUD for our Park Forest vouchers, and that's like $80-something.
so $80 a month times our 177.
Actually, it's based on, so it wouldn't be the full
So we have,
177.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jerry, did you say that Champaign and Chicago, Cook County both have a move and work
They
program?
do,
You've got contacts with both of those entities?
yes.
I guess I would ask, do some research on what the transition was from a traditional housing authority to implementing the program.
Okay.
What is involved with that? Do you need to get some kind of, approval either through HUD, Region 5, et cetera?
You
And
do.
then kind of the before and after.
Right.
What did it lead to in additional revenues coming through as far as the program goes, and what did it do to the actual staff?
And so, it's multiple programs, like I shared. We don't have a public housing program. We're not like Cook County, we don't have our own properties. That's a program you can apply for HUD. We have a voucher program you can apply for HUD. This is a separate program that you apply for HUD. They have multiple programs.
Well, I think what we ought to do is do the research and then come back.
Right.
And I wouldn't expect, you know, there are certain things that, when we go through the budget review process, you know, at the end of the week with my update, I can send you a link to the problem-oriented policing program, and you don't. Something like this is probably gonna take a few months for us to do some research on, come back and actually have a clear understanding. The final thing I would say is, the idea of, you know, sunsetting our housing authority and looking at the vouchers, if they're Will County, folding into Will County's authority or into Cook County, I cannot stress enough the value of the relationship we have between our police department, the building department, and the housing authority. And we folded that into Cook County, and I would imagine probably 90% of the vouchers in our community are probably folded into Cook County and not Will County, I would guess. There has got to be, I mean, off the top of my head, 100, 150 municipalities in Cook County where there are vouchers. And when we have a problem in our community, the police chief just goes right to Jerry, has a conversation. We're talking about 123 Willow Street. Boom. We're lucky right now. We have some semblance of a relationship with Rich Minacchio, who's the director, but that's not always going to be the case. And while Jerry and Larry deal with one police chief and 2 deputy chiefs, you'd be looking at getting in line with probably another 100 police chiefs, 300 deputy police chiefs. And I think it could be almost kind of similar to what we see with the eviction proceedings within the Cook County Sheriff's Department. You get put into a line, and maybe we'll get to you in 90 days, whenever it happens. Maybe you know somebody. And so this reputation that our housing authority has, that if you run afoul of local, state, or federal laws, and you run the risk of losing your voucher, I think we've got that reputation or the deterrent already built in our community. And without a doubt, people know that Park Forest will revoke your voucher. It's actually happened within the last 7 days. There's a house in town that's lost its voucher.
Out of those 100 municipalities, how many have housing authority?
Oh, none of them.
Except us.
But you know, Park Forest has also prided itself on a number of things that we've done historically. How many of those communities have a Freedom Hall or an Aqua Center or have a health department?
They're losing money.
Well, and I think sometimes you have to look at government services. You're not supposed to operate in the black. You're going to operate in the red. The question is to what level. And when Mark says that we're underwriting the housing authority by a net of $30,000 for that local control and what it allows us to go after a problem property, we're not talking about the subsidies that we were making to the health departments to the point where it got so bad that we had no choice but to make a decision. We're underwriting it to the tune of $30,000. I think that that's money well spent for the quality of life in our community.
Yeah, I think the thing you need to look at too is property values. If we give that up, we do not know, and the county will not tell us if it's a subsidized property or not. How do we even determine that there's a problem enough to go to the, once you find out if it is, then you go to the county and you say, hey, we got a problem, you know, how, you know, like I shared before in the 80s, it was 6-9 months down the road. What we got from Cook County after suing them was they gave us a list of, by street, and how many properties in the 400 block, 300 block, 200, they still never gave us the addresses. We never really got any kind of compliance. I mean, all we wanted to do was ask them, if there's a code violation or there's a problem with the property, would you hold up the money until we get a resolution? I mean, we didn't get anywhere with that.
So now I've also heard that Cook County Housing Authority would actually put a satellite location in other communities. Is that something that could be done then too then?
At their cost, I don't know.
Have you seen that there are other satellite offices for the Cook County Housing Authority in other communities?
Well, what I understand about Cook County, they have public housing. So they, for instance, have Jupiter right here in Harvey. They have Roby. Those are disabled senior buildings. And that I know of, they with the location in Harvey, they do have what we call that family self-sufficiency program works out of that office. But far as the other locations, I'm not sure. But one thing I will say, as Mark and Tom was talking about, that the Housing Authority does work very closely with the police department in case that we're able to really act on a case where there's a violation of the crime-free ordinance, and we do have a process and procedure in place important that the tenant is given a chance to have an informal hearing, and the hearing officer looks at everything, including the regulations, and determine if they're in violation of the program. And this is going across the board. If the tenant or the voucher holder violates the program, but also if the landlord. If the landlord violates the program, we have landlords that will ask tenants for money under the table. We're able to, if we once we're able to document and get that information, we're able to suspend that landlord for being in the program. And also, one thing about the program, we do, besides the annual inspections, we do quality control inspections, where we will pull voucher holders' name randomly, or if we're given a reason to check on a issue, Jerry and I work very closely. We'll go do a quality control inspection, and if there's anything anything regarding the unit, especially 24-hour violations like smoke detector, carbon monoxide, things like that. Those are violations that have to be taken care of within 24 hours, and we make sure that they're taken care of because that's the safety of the family. So we do work very closely with the police department and the building department, making sure the regulations are followed.
The underwriting drive enforced by the Board of Trustees, though, was protect the housing stock. Protect the housing stock, protect the housing values, protect the property taxes. Greater revenue from property taxes by better quality housing stock. And that was the underlying drive, because we were dealing with deteriorated houses, that property values were falling down, and we were dealing with code enforcement and demolition issue, ordinance, seeking demolition orders, and getting those landlords out of town. So, but we will definitely look into it.
Yes.
I don't, I think we'll definitely look into that program.
And then the last one was with the community development with the grant seeking task force. Have we ever looked to local school districts to start partnering with, looking for grant funding? Have we ever started to look into that? Because I know school districts are asking me if they can start working with us.
Well, I would tell you what I have seen. We've gone to Washington. Typically, the buckets of money that school districts can tap into, we can't. When we looked at doing partnership funding through the Department of Labor and doing workforce development through ImageWorks, and when you wanted to have schools involved, maybe to actually have workforce development's machinery put in, some of the stuff that Mark Kramer did, there are funding agencies that are much different for educational institutions than what we can tap into as municipalities. Periodically, there's been programs, I think the Carol White physical fitness grants, where it was kind of a community endeavor. If there are ideas that the schools have, we're always open to that, for sure. I think as far as our track record, we've got as good a track record of getting grants as any of the school districts.
Schools have leverage to not-for-profit organizations that we do, and the municipalities or government agencies do not have the ability to apply for. So they have a lot more avenues than we do.
But we're not averse to partnering with them.
Actually, I think we kind of started out when we first started our grant stuff. We actually did an outreach to 163 and 162.
Well, we looked at after-school programming, but I think what I would not want to see us do is become, the entity that's actually going out and soliciting grants for the district, because quite frankly, we've got plenty to do for our own staff as it is. And so, I know there's been reference in the past that districts have grant writers on staff. We prided ourselves that we don't have anybody on staff that just specifically does that. It's kind of thrown in as the additional job duties for all of our staff to be a part of what we've termed a larger grant-seeking task force, where we're looking at all different places.
The last comment is just for the Cable Communications Commission and the establishment of local origination programming. And also, school districts are ready to start airing things on the Cable Access Program channel. And so
we've done outreach to them for years.
Yeah, they're ready to start submitting things, so
Well-
we maybe have a sit down this summer. and
Oh,
we
that'd be
can
great.
really-
What we find is that it goes with teachers from semester to semester, and the kids from semester to semester, where we're soliciting or running programs. And they basically, what we have found is they want our equipment, as opposed to getting their own equipment. We lend out our equipment for 3 days at a time, and basically they want it like for the semester or for weeks over in their place, and they don't want to return it back and forth. But hold on, we've offered the studio, and we've talked to several people, I know at 227 and at Rich East, but it seems they're short term on it. It would be great that if the school actually put whether it was through SCORE or something like that, where they wanted to do an ongoing thing after school's program where we could work it, we solicit those types of things. It seems to be a teacher, or maybe I forgot what they're called, director, I forget like the athletic.
Well, your score is great, right?
Well, but I don't know, but it's amazing I remember
The
that.
next meeting of the cable commission is the fourth Wednesday of July.
Yes.
And so they meet on a quarterly basis. If there's somebody within Rich East who really thinks that this is something that we ought to be moving forward with.
I'd like to see maybe a letter sent out to all the school districts and say.
Ricky
come to this
Williams,
meeting.
yeah, and we've done that in the past too, we could redo it again, but Ricky Williams has kind of had connections with, he's our vice chair with 227, and he's worked harder than probably anybody in the schools of trying to get things done. But we do.
Yeah, and if you, I don't know if you know who Ricky Williams is. I mean, he's been a part of our Raceway Equity and Leadership Steering Committee, and at every turn, what he really wants to see is to get the youth involved with everything. So I could see him being that person who wants to outreach.
And we do send letters, about once a year, we send letters out to the school districts offering that we have these services. For the equipment and the studio, we'd like them to take advantage of school. And so you all know, for all you new board members too, I mean, the village will air programs, whether it's events, graduations, or any of that kind of stuff, anything of a community nature can submit it to us, whether it's to schools or other programs, and we can put it on Channel 4 and we'll air it. I mean, we actually did that with a basketball league for a season type of thing for little kids and that kind of stuff. But yes, we will continue to do that.
Excuse me, just one last question.
Sure.
I noticed here that it says that there were 25% of the vouchers in Park Forest in 2019 from CHA. Is that correct? Has Park Forest ever been overrun with a lot of vouchers from CHA throughout the years? And I believe you said the portable started in the 90s?
Right, not just CHA, but the majority of the voucher comes from Cook County, and then a total of 75% of Cook County and CHA are portable.
50%. It's usually Cook County runs about 50%.
Right.
Okay.
From their house, from Cook County Housing Authority.
Okay, so it's always been more Cook County rather than...
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Well, Cook County's,
There's always
really
been
is,
this,
yeah.
there's been this notion that much of it came from CHA,
Yeah.
and that's, so...
CHA isn't even run as well as Cook County is, and Cook County has troubles.
Interesting. Say it one more time. I'm sorry.
Side issue, Jerry worked for Cook County,
For Cook County
but we
for 10
have
years.
one of our predecessor executive directors who works in Chicago Housing Authority, who Jerry worked with as well.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, who's that?
Cheryl Burns.
Cheryl's back in Chicago?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Mhm.
Wow, okay.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Is there a motion to close or any more?
Any other questions about either community development or housing? If not, enjoy your Wednesday night off tomorrow. Rest up. I know I'm going to, because Thursday night we'll be here with Recreation and Parks and Economic Development starting at 6.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion.
Motion closed.
Thank you, everyone.